Hello and welcome to the webinar Security Masterclass, Episode 3. This is a part 3 of our 4-part Security Masterclass series here in partnership with Rubrik. Thank you so much for joining us. The topic of Episode 3 here today is how to provide data protection and data visibility. Hopefully, you've been able to join us on the first 2 episodes in this series here. If not, I encourage you to check out the handouts tab, and it's there that you'll find links to YouTube recordings of those first 2 episodes. Like all the episodes in the event series, these are relatively short, fast-paced, content-heavy webinar events, and the goal here is to help you to learn a lot about the topic of data protection and data visibility. Do it quickly and get all your questions answered. So we're going to be doing a lot of Q&A at the end of this relatively short webinar. So keep those questions in mind and post those there in the questions tab. Before we get started, just a few things that you should know about the webinar. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. I'll be introducing you to our expert presenter here in just a moment. Like I said, use the questions panel there in your audience console. And we also have our best question prize. I'll talk about that here in a moment as well. I want to remind you about the handouts tab. It's there that you'll find a link to the Rubrik Polaris datasheet, a Rubrik Polaris Sonar, the first 2 events in the series, and then also the 4th and final event in this 4-part series. It's there that you can register for the 4th part in the series. And at the end of the webinar here, you'll also be automatically redirected to that 4th event. We hope to see you on that event. And then finally, on this live webinar, I'll be announcing the winner of our $300 Amazon gift card. If you're watching this on demand, of course, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the handouts tab. And then also, as I mentioned, we've got our best question prize for a $50 Amazon gift card that we'll be announcing after the event via email to the prize winner. Still, you must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited now to be introducing you to our expert presenter here on the 4-part Security Masterclass series. Welcome, Mr. Jeff Inouye, Technical Marketing Architect at Rubrik. Jeff, it's great to have you. I'll hand it off to you now. Take it away.
And welcome to our 3rd segment in our Masterclass series, where we're going to cover topics on data protection, data security, as well as extracting additional value from your backups. My name is Jeff Inouye, and I'm a Technical Marketing Architect here at Rubrik, and I'll be your guide through this presentation as we talk about data classification. As a recap, in part 1, we talked about the zero trust architecture, the immutable file system, and defense in depth approach we use to achieve security in your backups. In the second part of the series, we talked about leveraging metadata and how we're collecting it in line with your backups and then using applications like Polaris Radar to identify anomalous behavior. If you didn't catch the first 2 parts, we'll send out the links to those presentations as we close out today's topic. And for today's topic, we're going to talk about data classification, or how more regulations and cyber threats have increased the awareness around data exposure. We'll introduce Polaris Sonar, we'll take a look at how it works and how it's configured, and then we'll dive into the demo. When we talk about data classification, there are 3 foundational targets that we're trying to achieve. The first is the type of data, or do the contents include sensitive data like financial, health, and personal information. The second is data location. So where does this data sit in the system and in the environment? The third is the access levels, or in other words, who has access to what and what can they do. The unfortunate truth is this problem is becoming more difficult, and there are 3 driving factors. The first is a bit of a no-brainer. It's data growth. There's more applications and more data than ever before. The second is data regulations. So both state and national policy continue to contribute to increased regulation. The third is increased risk. So we now have a larger operational responsibility to understand data content, especially when we're trying to effectively recover from a malicious event like ransomware. When we evaluate customer environments, a common theme is to view data and applications as tiers. If we think about tier 0 and tier 1, we have applications like messaging, authentication, as well as key customer data through primary applications. This is where we typically find point solutions for data classification. There's one key problem here in that data classification needs to be encompassed throughout the entire data environment. Therefore, we have to potentially deploy agents and balance the impact on production resources because we're scanning where the data resides. This is where we can leverage backup data at rest to gain this visibility without having to deploy agents or balance production resources. Let's take a look at how Polaris Sonar works and how it's configured. There are two primary concepts to grasp here. The first is the analyzer. An analyzer is the individual definition of data that Sonar should be discovering. So this is really the search strings that are used during the scanning operations. The second is the policy. A policy is a logical grouping of one or more analyzers. So what a policy can do is it can create a larger definition, and it's very flexible in the deployment. So once a policy is created, we can apply it to objects within the environment. This can be everything from virtual machines from VMware, Microsoft, Nutanix, and then we can also look at NAS workloads and Windows and Linux as well. The approach to this is very straightforward. So Sonar is going to take the policies that you've applied, and then it's going to scan your existing backups to identify what sensitive data lives where. There are three use cases that we see typically for Sonar. The first is compliance. So we have built-in templates to scan under a particular regulation, or you can build a custom template from your own queries. The second is access control. So we have the visibility to the user permissions, so we can identify easy security holes that have really high risk, such as global access or wide open permissions. The third is ransomware. So we're already providing a solution to securely back and recover, as well as identify anomalies. But what Sonar can do is it can be used to identify what data was exposed if an exfiltration event happens. So in other words, we know the systems that were impacted by the breach and understand the content of those systems. So let's dive into the demo and take a look at how we can identify sensitive data with Polaris Sonar. Okay, now that we're in the lab, let's take a look at the Sonar dashboard. From the top, we can see the total number of sensitive hits from the workloads that we have defined. Below that, we could take a look at things like files with sensitive hits and open access. And open access can be things like authenticated users or domain users. So anyone with a username and password has access to this sensitive data. The other is stale files with sensitive hits. This is sensitive data that hasn't been accessed in over a year, and potentially a good opportunity for cleanup. So let's take an example. Let's say we want to configure two policies for financial data and PII to run against my test VM in the lab. So to do that, we'll go ahead and click on Management and Configure Policies. We'll select US Financials and US PII. And then we'll go ahead and search for my VM. We'll select my VM and then click Configure. And just like that, I now have two policies applied to this workload to look for PII and financial data content. Let's take a look at a previous scan that I did on that same VM and observe the results. So what we're looking at here is the browse view, and we can walk the file system and understand where the sensitive data lives. On the right-hand side, you can see the classification details. You can also look at the file details or the folder details to give you the file path or the access time or the modified time. It also passes the permissions. So you can take this and look at something like a security audit and understand, hey, do these people need to have this type of access to this folder or file? So if we jump over to the file view, this is where things get a little bit more interesting, is that now we have a full list of everything that has sensitive data exposure. And from here, we can drill into things like files with hits and open access. So if we select this top file here, we can see that it has sensitive data exposure for the US PII policy. We can then drop over to users and then see that everyone has access to this particular file and something that needs to be remediated. Polaris Sonar grants the organization with actionable insights that can be leveraged to prevent a security event proactively or provide key information if a ransomware event occurs. I greatly appreciate your time today. Please sign up for the final webinar next week, where we're going to uncover additional features of one of our latest products, AppFlows. David, back to you.
All right, excellent presentation. Jeff, I really appreciate you doing that demo there for us on data classification and visibility and data protection with Rubrik. I love the interface, very beautifully designed. We've got some questions already coming in, and we appreciate your questions. Don't forget about the best question prize that we're running today as well. So if you have a question on your mind, now's the time to get it in. Also, one more thing before we start Q&A, I brought up a poll question for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about the Rubrik solution? And so we'll just leave that up while we take your questions. Let's see. Jeff, you ready for some Q&A?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. First question I see here, Bradford is asking, does Sonar have templates for FERPA and HIPA, for example?
Not currently, but I did do a quick search here because I did see that question pop up. And there is other customers looking for that specifically. And there's a request internally for that to be put in place. But they did express the same sentiment in terms of, there's a lot of obscure terms and dictionary terms that have to be included in that.
Okay. Good info. Thank you. Let's see. Next question. How do you know that your backups aren't susceptible to ransomware? How do you know that the backups aren't going to get, encrypted with ransomware?
Yeah, and that's something we covered in a previous episode. But in terms of backup security, that starts with the file system. So our file system doesn't allow for modifications of objects once they land. So in terms of ransomware and the encryption scenario, that's something that's actually not feasible within our system.
Very nice. That's a big concern. I know today, especially just making sure that the backup data, your last line of defense, isn't infected. Um, let's see. Um, Another question here: is it possible to predefine protection policies based on Sonar findings?
Uh, Not that I am aware of. I haven't seen that particular workflow. Um, the first workflow, and I guess I'll kind of sidestep here a little bit, is the remediation of items that we find. So that automation work has already started to be built into the product. But in terms of predefined protection policies, that's defined outside of the scope of Sonar at this current time, and that's again based upon our SLA domain, our task workflow engine.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Brian's asking if Rubrik uh, does data protection for Fortune 500 companies. Maybe you want to talk about other companies that use Rubrik.
Yes, there are some Fortune 500 companies. I don't actually keep up with the list as frequent as I should, but there are customers out there that we do support. If there's a desire for a published list, we could certainly retrieve that.
Very nice. Another question: have you conducted a privacy impact assessment? Does that one make
No,
sense? Or
I would have to research that one. I'm assuming that would be in line with some sort of certification, but
yeah, we can get
yeah,
back
I
to
can
that
certainly
one.
look. Mhm.
Absolutely. Is there a way? Another question here: is there a way to air gap the data?
Yeah, and again, that's something that we covered in the topic of backup security. But in our terms, and this is something that we had talked about internally as well with air gaps and I guess the air gap terminology. But we define it as the backup files themselves are unavailable to the network, and that's how we have to say consider it and call it a virtual air gap, because essentially no outside services or anything that's trying to um, modify or touch a backup file from the network it's disallowed.
Got it. Okay. This is an interesting question here from Bradford. Do you feel that there are any data security compromises that need to be made to facilitate data visibility, or is this more of a take care of the low hanging fruit first model?
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly to take care of the low hanging fruit, because what we've found in customer environments is that there's a lot of this data that they haven't done classification for that they need to. Um, Now, there's a lot of point solutions out in the market that do very, real time based stuff that does very interesting stuff in terms of classification. Our target right now is to help our existing customers cover that, the full slate of everything that goes through backups, which is essentially all the important data.
Very nice. And then next question here I was going to ask you, and that is around, you talk about um, Polaris, excuse me, and Sonar. Are these separate products from the Rubrik, data protection appliance that you might have on premises? How does that work? How's the architecture there?
Yeah, so CDM is the code base that covers our scale out cluster, that's deployed either via appliance or can be deployed software only in, say, vCenter or a Hyper-V environment, for example. It could also be deployed in cloud, and that's essentially one code base. The other is Polaris, and that's a platform that's delivered as a SaaS application. And then Sonar, Radar, App Flows are all modules on top of that SaaS application platform.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for explaining that architecture there. This is an interesting question from Charo. Is there sort of a self-service option available for Rubrik where there might be a process in place to support a data access request?
Yeah, so everything in the product is API first. I mean, that's like the development strategy. So anything that we do within the interface, we can code or script against. So that lends a hand for anything that can consume a REST API. So if you think about ServiceNow or vRealize, that catalog can be integrated with our product as well.
Got it. Okay. And then this is an interesting question. I mean, something, and it reminds me of something that I've seen when it comes to ransomware is that a lot of companies have a data protection product in place, but they simply can't do a mass restore in a timely manner. How would someone know with Rubrik how quickly can they get their data back?
Yeah, and there's a couple of advantages there in terms of mass recovery because that's going to be a challenge for anybody. But what we can use to our advantage is that since it is a scale out on-prem cluster, data is local, so we can use all of those nodes to perform the export operation to whichever landing zone will be for the new production. We can also do in-place recovery. Although if you're talking about ransomware events, typically you're going to be trying to either pull the networking or at worst, I suppose, suspend machines. So a lot of that space is going to be allocated for. So a lot of customers are opting, hey, I'm going to have more space on my primary storage. We'll set up an export process if we need to fully recover.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, it looks like we've answered pretty much all the questions. I know that we're trying to keep these kind of fast-paced, relatively short, information heavy. So this has been a great demo here of the Rubrik data protection and data visibility solution powered by Polaris and Sonar. Jeff, it's been great having you on. I look forward to having you back in our next episode.
Awesome. Thank you.
And of course, thank you to everyone out there in the audience for answering the poll question that you see there on the screen. We do appreciate your feedback. We do appreciate all the excellent questions as well. Before we go, I want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. That's going out to Brenda Mesher from Indiana. Congratulations, Brenda Mesher from Indiana. We'll reach out to you, and then we'll also be reaching out to our Best Question Prize winner as well. I hope that you'll join us on the fourth and final episode of the Security Masterclass series, here brought to you by Rubrik. Our next episode, happening on June 15th at 3 p.m. Eastern, is Driving Velocity and Intelligence to Your Data Recovery. It's going to be really cool. After this event here, you'll be automatically redirected to the landing page for that. So we hope that you'll choose to join us on that event. It'll be the same format, relatively short, information heavy. I'm pretty sure we'll see a demo on that, and then we'll answer your questions live. Thanks for joining us on the Security Masterclass event. Have a great day, and visit Rubrik.com for more information.